Hey guys, and welcome back to another Lost Bits video right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we explore the scrapped, unused, and unseen content in video games. You guys have been requesting this a lot, and in this video we'll finally have a look at Nintendo's #1 selling game to date,
Sports Pack 4 Revolution!
Or, you know, Wii Sports as it was eventually renamed. Now sure, the insanely high sales numbers for Wii Sports were basically the result of the game being included with the initial batch of Wii consoles that were sold to everyone and their grandma. But regardless, this was a new era for gaming, a revolution, and I think it was a great way for Nintendo to give players a glimpse as to what the Wii was about. Anyways, we got a ton of scrapped modes, graphics, and more to go through. So go grab your Wii remote, it's time to— oh wait, almost forgot to put on the wrist strap, safety first. It's time to find some lost bits. Okay, so let's start things off with probably the biggest thing that was cut from Wii Sports. The final version of Wii Sports that was shipped along with Wii console starting November 19th, 2006, and that makes me feel old, as you probably know, had a total of 5 playable sports: baseball, bowling, boxing, golf, and tennis, or as I like to call it, waggle the Wii remote as fast as you can to win. But it turns out that initially, in the game's development, there was actually a 6th sport that was planned to be featured. This other sport was an airplane mode, and it was seen in footage of the game at E3 of 2006, so only a few months before the release of the game. In this build, bowling and boxing were reportedly missing, so it seems like they were added in to replace this airplane mode. Seeing as how polished bowling and boxing are in the final release, I would bet that this E3 build was pretty early in development because the game must have been pretty close to production at this point. This is likely as we see a more basic title logo of the game in the title screen that also, of course, was scrapped. Anyways, this airplane game would have had the player controlling the pitch, yaw, and roll of the aircraft by tilting the Wii remote accordingly. The plane would fly around an island, and the player would have to try and fly through numerous rings. Yeah, we know that's always a good time. This island looks very similar to Woohoo Island, which first appeared in Wii Fit, and then in several other games like Wii Sports Resort, Pilot Wings Resort, and even Mario Kart 7. It is very likely that this stage was an early version of what would eventually become Woohoo Island. If this all sounds very familiar to you, you probably played Wii Sports Resort because, although slightly modified from this E3 build, essentially the Air Sports Island flyover mode from Wii Sports Resort is the same thing as in this E3 build. So I think it's safe to say that either the developers of Wii Sports saw that the airplane mode just wasn't ready or polished enough for the game's release, or it just didn't work as well as they wanted to with the standard Wii remote. With the introduction of Wii Motion Plus years later, I'm sure Nintendo saw that this mode was now viable with the improved motion control accuracy and then revisited this idea. I honestly don't mind the game being removed from the original Wii Sports since I think it would have felt sort of out of place and removed from the rest of the more conventional sports. And I think the mode definitely fits better with the whole island theme of Wii Sports Resort. Unfortunately, to this day, no playable version of this original scrapped airplane mode has been leaked to the public, and there are no remnants of it in the game's files. But hopefully one day we can come across a beta build of the game with this mode still intact. Next up, let's chat about some unused graphics and textures. First up, strangely enough, left over in the files of the game are these textures numbered 1 through 9. If it's not immediately obvious, these textures are the same as the ones used in the billiards game seen in Wii Play. There's also this texture among the 9, which is the texture used for the cue ball. There are 2 theories as to why these billiard ball textures are here, both of which I think are somewhat possible. Theory 1 suggests that since these textures are found with the rest of the game's boxing mode files, the billiard balls might have been intended to be used for the dodging boxing training mode with Matt here. The second theory is that just like the airplane minigame, the billiards mode was also planned to be included in Wii Sports and was developed to some capacity before ultimately being cut. Now, I really think the second theory of the billiard mode being repurposed into Wii Play makes a lot more sense than Matt here chucking billiard balls at your Mii. He may be the most powerful Mii of them all, but I just don't think it's as likely. Next, also boxing related, is this very low-res image of what looks like a boxing match. Just based on the name of the file, it seems like this was meant to be displayed on the TVs in the boxing stadium, and it was probably a placeholder for the view of the camera that shows the fight on the screen. In the final game, it appears whatever the idea was for this texture, apart from the video feed of the fight, it was probably scrapped in favor of this texture, showing some motivational messages and the Wii logos. Following that is something a bit less interesting, an unused graphic of a default Mii head. For some odd reason, this file is identical in both FaceDummy A and FaceDummy B. Apparently, these images were to be used to test the scoreboard in the baseball mode. Moving along to the bowling mode now, looks like there's an early version of the bowling lane itself. The unused lane has some crude gutters, a different texture, as well as a different and way lower resolution texture for the back wall. And if you're curious, here is a side-by-side comparison of both lanes. Some speculate that this lane would have been seen in the E3 2006 build of the game, but as I mentioned earlier, bowling was reportedly not available in the demo that year. And since there's no available footage of the mode from E3 that year to prove its existence at the event, the unused bowling lanes very well could have been either from an earlier or later build of the game. Then there's tennis, and although there aren't any notable unused graphics or anything, there are some early screenshots of the game that show how it used to look like before undergoing some pretty big changes. Apparently the game was to initially feature Mario characters, before changing to early Mii versions that looked like traditional Japanese dolls known as kokeshi, before finally changing to the Mii designs that we saw in the final release. Now finally, moving on to golf, and here's where things get spicy. Left over in the game's files are several normally inaccessible golf courses, some more complete than others. Some of these I was able to load in and access myself, but others I wasn't and could only view their model file on my computer. Anyways, first up is Golf Course FC18. If you've played the game Golf on the NES, you may have noted that all of the holes in the golf mode of Wii Sports are actually remakes of holes from the NES game. This unused course is modeled after the 18th hole from the NES game, but for whatever reason just wasn't completed and is still left over in the files. It is named FC18, which follows the naming scheme of all the rest of the holes, with FC probably standing for Famicom, the Japanese equivalent of the NES, and then the number of the hole from the NES game that was being reimagined. This unused map is pretty unfinished and is incredibly small. So we've touched on the E3 build quite a bit at this point, and again, here we have next Golf Course E3, which, just like the name clearly suggests, is the course that was used at the live demo of the game at 2006's E3. Thankfully this time I was able to load this course into the game. This version that's left over in the game's files doesn't use the more cartoon-like textures and lighting of the E3 demo, and instead now just uses the more realistic ones seen in the final game. There's not much else to say here, it's a pretty basic hole, but still cool that it's left over here for us to find. Next up is Golf Course Survey, and this course really isn't a typical hole of golf at all. The course is circular and is surrounded by trees, has these red and blue lines, and also has these numbers indicating the distance away from the center. It is believed that this may have been intended for a driving range of sorts for the player to practice hitting the ball certain distances and angles to improve their game. Surveying land is the art and science of determining the 3D position of points and the distance and angles between them, so the name of the course definitely supports the idea of this being a practice range. And last but certainly not least is my favorite unused hole, Golf Course Angle, which is basically a test map. And you guys know I love me some test maps. This very large stage has to be viewed from certain angles to truly see all it has to offer. This test map has various terrain and land deformities at different angles, like the file name suggests. There's sand and fairway bumps, hills, and even some stair-like formations, all intended to test how the golf ball's physics will react to these obstacles. I always love farting around in these test rooms, so I'm glad I was able to load this one in. I would love to be the guy that gets paid to test games in rooms like this. Here I also noticed that the sun will appear halfway inside the ground. I assume it's to provide proper lighting here, but yeah, still pretty weird to see. Last, I think I should mention that there are some more rumored unused tennis courts, however, their legitimacy is questionable. There is video proof of these courts, and they are said to be using files from a beta build of the game forced into the final release, but I couldn't find any sort of legitimate beta version of the game floating on the internet, so until this can be verified, I have my doubts. This one just looks like some of the textures were corrupted, and then this one just looks like the practice court textures were replaced with ones from Wii Play. Again, I could certainly be wrong, and these are indeed real unused beta courts, but like I said, I have my doubts until there's some verifiable proof. And for the last stop of this video, lads, I've been kinda teasing it throughout the video, but now let's finally try moving the camera and see if we can find some hidden content that is normally unseen. We'll go through all the modes in order here, so let's first start off with tennis, and where else to start but the main tennis court. Just outside of normal view, we can get a better look at the, spectators? There are also several buildings around the court, which all seem to feature this same texture of what looks like some sort of park or golf course. And here, the same texture is even stretched out across several windows. Unfortunately, even though it's cool to get a closer look at these buildings from angles we normally can't, there's nothing inside of them. Surrounding the court area, we can also have a closer look at the background texture, which appears to be an image of a real-world town. No idea exactly where this could be, but it definitely looks like somewhere in Southern California to me. Till now, I always thought the character position select screen background was just a flat image before it transitioned to the game. But nope, turns out it's actually the entire court map placed sideways. Pretty cool little trick there, Nintendo. Then there's the alternate practice court, which doesn't really have much besides the 3 courts. It's basic, there's nothing really out of view, but one thing that's somewhat interesting is that from afar, you can see that there is some additional lighting added to the middle court that is being played on, seemingly out of nowhere. Batter up, it's time to check out baseball. Just like with the pre-game tennis trick, baseball also has one of its own. It turns out the screen at the start showcasing the batter and pitcher is actually sort of a screen of its own, which as you can see I can zoom in, out, and around. I can control the camera simultaneously in both angles, which is kinda cool, and the only 3D model here is the verses in the middle. Now in the actual baseball diamond, we can again have a look at all the lovely fans, which love to flash, I guess. Surprisingly, instead of just using some generic park image like the tennis court, here the texture on the window actually looks like a true reflection of a baseball field. When pitching, moving back the camera reveals that all the catchers turn into ghosts. Very spooky. Also, not very unseen, but it was cool to plop the camera in the empty dugouts. I definitely think it gave the game sort of a different feel playing it from this angle. Ah yes, the great sport of bowling. Looking behind the player, we can get a better look at the bowling balls. Or should I say bowling... Yeah, I don't even know what shape to call these. But the coolest part here lies in the upside down land. Yep, this is a similar reflection technique that we saw in several games like Mario Kart 7, where to create the illusion of reflection, models are duplicated and flipped. Only here it's kinda different as the models aren't really duplicated, but instead the view of the camera is. Let me try and explain. See here, some things like this garbage and vending machine are actually flipped, but all the other Miis appear very disproportionate at times. That's because the reflection is basically just displaying what the camera would see if it had been above ground. Confusing, I know, but I hope that made at least some sense. We can also see how bowlers beside you snap into existence, as well as how the pins get swept away into oblivion. I hope this Mii didn't have dinner plans or anything, cause this practice bowling alley has no doors or any way to escape. Golf may not have as much unseen stuff, but man, is it nice to just look at all the scenery. I also think it's really cool to see all the areas from angles we aren't supposed to, so we can see how some of the mountains just don't look right. We can also get a closer look at the castle on hole 5, which bears some resemblance to the Summerstone Castle from Woohoo Island. Again, Woohoo Island didn't officially appear until Wii Fit, but if this castle is indeed supposed to be the same castle, then this only further supports the idea that Woohoo Island may have had its debut in this game's airplane mode. It's also really cool to look at all these holes from a bird's eye view and compare them to their original NES Golf counterparts. Another cool thing about Golf is that even though the mini-maps appear to now be 2D images since they don't move, a full 3D model of each hole exists in the files, and it looks like these more basic models were used for the mini-maps. These look similar to the FC18 unused hole I mentioned earlier, so this leads me to believe that that file was only the mini-map version of it. What's even more interesting with these map models is that they all still use textures that were used in the beta, but nowhere else in the final release. And this is the only instance of beta texture use like this that I'm aware of. And last up is of course boxing. Here again, the intro screen works just like the baseball one. In the ring, we can have a closer look at all the deformed fans, some of which are just lacking most of their body. Am I being too harsh on the spectators in this video?
No.
So the TV screens here replicate what the camera sees, kind of like what we saw in other games like Mario Kart 64. The only difference here is that it appears that these TVs only display the cage and fighters, so I couldn't do the trippy TV effect like I always do, which was a major bummer. The boxing arena is really dark, but I looked up and around and there just wasn't much more to see here. Lastly is the training dojo with the master himself, Matt. It's a pretty small building, but it was still cool to have a closer look at all the posters, Matt's collection of low polygonal trophies, as well as the scale in the back, which upon closer inspection appears to maybe be a Nintendo brand weight scale. A fine addition to any Nintendo fan's collection.
I'll take 10.
When I was younger playing this game, I always wondered what the outside of the building could look like. There's really not much out here that we haven't seen in other areas, but I can't say that I'm disappointed. Just being able to finally see the building from the outside was just so awesome. And that's basically all the unseen and I guess semi-unseen content I could find. Overall, the game was pretty tidy. There weren't any random models found out of bounds, which honestly I was pretty surprised with given that this is a launch title. But regardless, I thought it was still really cool to see some of the tricks the developers employed throughout the game. And with that, guys, concludes this Wii Sports Lost Bits video, and I hope you enjoyed it. When I had the idea to make this video, I certainly didn't think it would end up being this long. As always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to slap a like down below and let me know what other games you would like to see covered here on Lost Bits in the future. Also, I gotta give a huge special thank you to RDA, Deep Game Research, Trevor, Trash Bandicoot, and all of the amazing contributors over at the cutting room floor for helping me a ton with making this video possible. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, you can do so by clicking on the card right here. And if you want to stay even more up to date or support the channel, be sure to subscribe here, check out my merch at TetraBitGaming.com, as well as swing by my other social media things, all of which will be linked in the description below. But as always, guys, thank you all so much for tuning in and for all of your support, and I will see you in a bit.